Hey everybody, this is Dan and you're watching Bitcoin Reactions, the YouTube channel where I react to people talking about Bitcoin on the internet. So today I'm really excited. Obviously the Bitcoin price has been doing very well. It just hit $73,000. It's about to hit all these new all-time highs. So what I decided I wanted to do today is go back in time and see what people were saying about Bitcoin back when Bitcoin just broke $100 for the first time. Let's give it a go. Before we start, be sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and start this video right now.
Bitcoin is an electronic online digital currency, was created about 3 years ago, kind of flew under the radar. Now it's starting to actually gain some traction.
Right off the bat, I really like what this anchor is saying. He's saying that Bitcoin is just beginning to get some traction. Back when Bitcoin just broke $100, this felt like a lot of traction at the time. You have to remember that at this point in time, Bitcoin was very obscure. Very few people understood it. Most people just had never heard of Bitcoin before. It's not like it is today where everyone kind of has an opinion on Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin's had a lot more traction since then, but already I'm liking how he's starting off. So let's continue on. Let's see what he says next.
You exchange your dollars, you exchange your euros, whatever. You go onto these networks and it's an accepted currency, and it's zooming in value lately. Just unbelievable how much this has taken off.
Again, I love how he's saying it's zooming in value. It really puts things in perspective how regardless of what the price is, anytime Bitcoin hits a new all-time high, it feels like the price is zooming in value. When Bitcoin hit $100, they're saying, wow, this new crazy currency is going up so high. This is wild. I remember back in 2017 when it hit $10,000, and then when it almost touched $20,000, people were saying, wow, this is absolutely incredible. Bitcoin is growing so fast. A few years later, it went up, it broke past, the $20,000 mark, broke past the $50,000 mark. It hit almost $70,000 in 2001. Nowadays, $70,000 really doesn't feel like that high of a number. We're past $70,000, at least at the time of this recording, and it's beginning to feel like $70,000 is boring. People aren't really happy with a $70,000 Bitcoin. We'll see where it goes over the next year and over the next decade. But again, it's really interesting to see how regardless of what price it is, anytime Bitcoin hits a new all-time high, people start getting really excited. And I love how they're getting excited when the all-time high at this point is only $100, which is so much less than what it is now. So let's continue on. I like this video so far. Let's see what he has to say next.
And there are places that are beginning to actually accept this sort of universal digital currency. Kind of operates in the shadows, not regulated, but it's a total outgrowth of people starting to get worried about these currency crises, debt crises.
So what this guy just said, and he's absolutely correct, was that Bitcoin, at least in a large part, was a result of a lot of people getting really worried and really upset about the different debt crises that were going on all over the world. When Bitcoin came out, the United States was in the middle of the 2008-2009 debt crisis. A lot of people were really financially hurt during that time. It was pretty terrible. Also at that time, movements like Occupy Wall Street were in full effect. People really hated everything about our financial system. I think a lot of people still probably, at the very least, heavily distrust everything that's going on with our financial system. If you just take a look at inflation numbers, people are always really upset about it. Inflation is a really big talking point in the elections. Also, one of the interesting things that I don't know if they are going to mention in this video, Satoshi Nakamoto, the person that created Bitcoin, actually inscribed a message in the block, and that message said, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for the banks." This message was actually a headline about a European bank that was about to get bailed out. But again, we were having bailouts in the United States just as much. So bottom line, this anchor was absolutely right that at least Bitcoin in a large part was a result of people not trusting and being upset with the current financial system. So let's move on. I want to see what this guy says next.
Where are these things accepted? Still not a lot of places. I checked out online, not a lot of websites that you would recognize, but the places are kind of novelty clothing, gaming sites, yeah, wait for it, porn, some of those places. But, you know, there are a lot of drawbacks, there are a lot of fears that I'm sure that our guests are going to talk about, but this tells you how really insecure people are in this age of debt and currency crises and all the other things that we have going on in the world.
So this anchor, he's right again. He's saying that Bitcoin isn't being used a lot of places as a currency. That's accurate. The number one place it probably was being used at this time was a website called the Silk Road. For anyone that doesn't know, the Silk Road was a website on the dark web, and people used it to primarily buy drugs and other illegal items. It eventually got shut down, but I think that's probably what this person is referring to. But it is interesting that even at this time, people, even if not widely, were using it as a currency. And it looks like he's about to bring on some people that are going to say some of the arguments and counter arguments against Bitcoin. So I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say. Let's check it out.
First, I have to give Bitcoin creators credit. At least they know enough not to trust fiat money that's controlled by our government.
Okay, I think I can already tell where this is heading. This guy, he's saying that Bitcoiners are right that they shouldn't trust fiat money, which is money that has been created by the governments. This sounds like one of the classic arguments from gold bugs. Gold bugs, in case you didn't know, are people that want to revert back to the gold standard. The gold standard obviously went away back in the early 70s, but one of the things that gold bugs and Bitcoiners have in common to this day is that they both think that fiat money or government money is not very good. And the reason why we think it's not very good is that the government has the ability to print infinite amounts of it and therefore inflate away the value. So far, I agree with what this guy's saying. If I'm right, and if this guy is in fact a gold bug, he is probably going to start saying some things that are probably incorrect. But to this point, I agree with this guy so far.
But they're trying to reinvent the wheel, and they've come up with a flat tire. We already have a perfect, real form of money, and it's called gold.
So I was exactly right here. This guy just said, we already have a perfect form of money, and it's gold. This guy said it, and he's wrong. Gold was a fantastic form of money back in the analog era, back before everything was digitized. The reason why it was a great form of money is because people needed to exchange things physically. Gold is a physical object. It just worked very, very well where if you're going to buy something from someone, you can hand them over a gold or a silver coin and they can hand you back that item in return. In the digital era, which is the era that we live in now, we need to be able to buy things online, and we don't want to have to pay for things with physical gold. In fact, we don't even want to pay for things with physical items in general. For the most part, cash, it's not completely gone, but it's on its way out. So to sum it up, gold was a great form of money back in the analog era before everything was digitized. Today, in the digital era, we need to have money that moves as easily as email all around the world. And that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin works so well as money, because it can move digitally all across the world with ease. So he's wrong here, but let's continue on and see the rest of this guy's argument.
Money has to have 4 elements. It has to be very rare, indestructible, divisible without losing its purchasing power, and cannot be increased by fiat.
So right here, this gold guy, he's describing the characteristics of money. He's correct in describing all of the characteristics of money. Where he's wrong, I don't even know if he realizes how wrong he is here, but Bitcoin is better than gold in almost every characteristic of money that he just described. So let's move on. I just want to set the stage for whatever he's going to say next. So let's continue on.
And Bitcoins fail on the first two. They are not rare, and they are very much destructible.
So I think this guy probably just doesn't understand what Bitcoin is or how it works. He's saying that Bitcoin is not rare and that Bitcoin is very much destructible. And he is 100% wrong. Bitcoin is very rare. It's actually more rare than gold. And the reason why it is more rare than gold is because it is hard capped in its algorithm that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever. In comparison, there is essentially an unlimited amount of gold. If the price of gold were to increase, then eventually it would become profitable for people to use all sorts of technology to mine gold from the sea, mine gold from sand, even go out and mine asteroids and get gold from outer space. In comparison, like I said, Bitcoin is capped at 21 million. There will never be any more. So to say that Bitcoin is not rare is just factually incorrect. And then his second point, which is that Bitcoin is very much destructible, is also completely wrong. When people talk about Bitcoin being decentralized, what they mean is that Bitcoin is distributed all across the world in every single country, across millions and millions and millions of people. Everyone in the world has access to it. And what this means is that it is essentially impossible to destroy Bitcoin or the Bitcoin network. You can try, but it won't work. It is just too difficult to do because it has too many copies split up amongst the entire world. So he's just very, very wrong. It's okay. I'm going to assume that he probably just didn't understand Bitcoin, and that's why he's saying these things. Hopefully, if they bring on a guy to counter his arguments, he'll be able to explain that Bitcoin is in fact rare and is in fact indestructible. So let's continue on.
Had PayPal invented Bitcoin, we'd all be heralding it as the most important financial revolution since the internet, since the credit card perhaps. And I guess I would say, as for those first 2 points, as to it being destructible and rare, I guess I don't know if I agree with that.
I'm glad they brought this guy on. It looks like this is going to be the pro-Bitcoin guy. Essentially, he just countered the gold guy's argument. He said that Bitcoin is rare and that Bitcoin is indestructible. He also said another interesting point, that if it was created by PayPal or someone else, that it would be heralded as the greatest financial invention of all time. I think that's a really interesting point. That might be true. There's definitely arguments for it. Regardless, I don't think it's that relevant here, but I'm really glad that he said that because I think that that is something that is pretty cool to think about. So let's continue on. I want to see what this guy says next.
I mean, gold is only rare because it's physically scarce, but
Right.
Bitcoin is rare because it counts on the scarcity of CPU time. And so
Okay, so I just want to clarify something really quick. This guy just said that Bitcoin is rare because of CPU time. That's not why Bitcoin is rare. Bitcoin is rare because it's part of its algorithm that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. It doesn't matter anything about CPU time in terms of rarity. Bitcoin is only going to have 21 million units. Regardless of how fast computers get, they will never be able to mine more Bitcoin than that. I just want to make that quick clarification before he goes on. So let's move on and continue.
likewise, as to destructibility, I think that's also sort of in question.
So again, he just said destructibility in Bitcoin is also in question. He's absolutely right here. Bitcoin is, for all intents and purposes, indestructible. Let's move on and see what the video says next.
What are the chances of someone coming up with a counterfeit Bitcoin, and they present that to an end user, and they're accepting this phony Bitcoin?
Okay, so now the gold guy is talking about counterfeit Bitcoin, and he is questioning how easy is it to create a fake Bitcoin. If you're talking about creating new or extra or fake Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network that's inscribed in a transaction, creating counterfeit Bitcoin is impossible. There's lots of reasons for that, but essentially creating a fake Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network is orders of magnitude more difficult than creating a counterfeit dollar. To this point, there has never been one counterfeit transaction that's occurred on the Bitcoin blockchain. We can actually validate that because Bitcoin is 100% transparent. So you can go in and see every single transaction and prove that there has never been one counterfeit or one fraudulent transaction on the network. I'm really interested to see how the Bitcoin guy reacts and answers his question. Hopefully he says something like that, but let's check it out.
I guess the chances would be astronomically low, and that's the whole design. I mean, the
Why
way
is
the way that you create a Bitcoin is that you basically have to find a larger, rare number, bigger than any of the other Bitcoin out there. And so every Bitcoin, the next Bitcoin is even harder to create.
So I'm not really sure where this guy is getting his information about how Bitcoin are created, but he's not really right. I guess I can see where he's coming from. He's directionally correct in saying that Bitcoin are harder to create over time. That is true, but he's wrong in how they're actually made. Bitcoins are made in the Bitcoin mining process. It's a complex process. I go into detail about it in my book, but essentially what's happening is all the miners around the world are all searching for an answer to a question. And when they find the answer, they tell the rest of the network, and then the network rewards them with a certain amount of Bitcoin. It's not required for anyone to know how the Bitcoin mining process works in order to get value from Bitcoin and in order to use Bitcoin. But I wanted to make sure that everyone does have an idea of what is happening in the mining process so that they're not getting any sort of the wrong information from this video. Again, what miners are doing is they are looking for a particular number. We call that a nonce, which is just a random number that when put through a specific algorithm, which in this case is the SHA-256 algorithm, with specific pieces of data from the block that they're mining and the previous block, results in an answer which is acceptable to the rest of the Bitcoin community. So again, not really important for any casual Bitcoiners out there, but I just want to make sure that at the very least, I am providing the correct information. The rest of what he's saying, again, where Bitcoin is harder to create over time, that is correct, or at least it has proven to be correct so far. So let's continue on. I want to see what this guy says next.
And so I'd say right now it requires vast amounts of CPUs, generally through Amazon Cloud and things like this, to create the next Bitcoin. So it'd be exceedingly impossible or exceedingly difficult to create a counterfeit Bitcoin.
So here he's finishing his statement. He's basically saying that over time it's becoming more and more and more difficult to create a counterfeit Bitcoin on the blockchain, basically creating what we call a double spend or extra Bitcoin. What he's saying here is completely accurate. He's also talking about how it requires heavy amounts of CPU usage. That's also very correct. In fact, at this point, you can't even really use CPUs to mine Bitcoin for the most part. Nowadays, they use specialized ASIC miners, which are just very powerful computers that only mine for Bitcoin. So overall, he's finishing his statement off strong. And let's continue on and see what he says next.
So hacking Bitcoin could be a problem, but what about someone coming up with a counterfeit that end users don't recognize as being counterfeit, and that eroding the purchasing power of all existing Bitcoin?
You guys.
So this Scold guy, he's clarifying his question a little bit. He's saying that he's not really talking about hacking the system or creating a 51% attack. What he's saying is he's interested in people getting Bitcoin that they think are real Bitcoin and are in fact not real Bitcoin. So I'm going to give a little bit of credence to what this guy is saying right now, because there have been a lot of instances in the past of people issuing fake or paper Bitcoin. Usually the way this works is that exchanges usually will tell people that they have Bitcoin that they don't really have. So people will think that they have Bitcoin. And then what's happening in the background is exchanges are using that Bitcoin and selling it and doing whatever with it. And when all these people that think that they have Bitcoin come to withdraw their Bitcoin and bring it out into self-custody, then they find out that their Bitcoin isn't really there. And this results in what are essentially old school bank runs. I do understand what he's saying. Examples of people issuing paper Bitcoin or counterfeit Bitcoin, if that's what you want to call it, are pretty common. It happened in Mt. Gox in 2014. It happened with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX just a couple years ago. It happened with the Celsius network. Again, this is all happening not on the Bitcoin network itself, but on centralized exchanges where people are giving custody of their Bitcoin to untrustworthy third parties. Like I said, this is fairly common. And Bitcoin, we actually have a saying to help people avoid these types of traps. It's called not your keys, not your coins. And what this is essentially saying is that you have to keep your Bitcoin in self-custody where you own the keys and where you have control over them. And then once you do that, the idea of having counterfeit Bitcoin or paper Bitcoin basically does not exist. And the good news is that getting self-custody of your Bitcoin and controlling your keys is actually really, really easy. So let's continue on. I understand why this guy said it. I gave a little bit of credence to what he was saying because there are elements of truth to it. But for the most part, again, if you're keeping your Bitcoin in self-custody and you have your own keys, it is essentially impossible to have counterfeit or fake Bitcoin. So let's continue on. I think he brought up a good point. Let's see what they talk about next.
I guess one of my concerns here too is that, there's a lot of stories about drug dealers using these kind of things, and I think it's just a matter of it's not regulated, it's not controlled.
Okay, so what this anchor is saying, and he's bringing up a really interesting point, is he's saying that Bitcoin is not regulated and it's not controlled. And he is actually 100% wrong. Bitcoin is actually the most effectively regulated currency in the entire world. The reason why he's saying this is that Bitcoin is not regulated by the government. Bitcoin is regulated by math, and Bitcoin is regulated by electricity. The government has no control over Bitcoin. So I understand why he's saying that Bitcoin isn't regulated. It is true, it's not regulated by the governments, but it is regulated. There are very firm, very strict rules on Bitcoin, and everyone follows those rules to a T. And then he brings up one other point where it's being used by drug dealers. People opposing Bitcoin always say something like this. They always say Bitcoin is used by drug dealers or other bad people. And here's the thing. Yes, drug dealers do use Bitcoin, but drug dealers also use the current financial system. One of the core tenets in the Bitcoin financial system is that Bitcoin can be used by everybody. There is no ability for anyone to be cut out of the Bitcoin system. The reason why that's important is because in the current financial systems around the world, good people are usually cut out of them for a variety of reasons. And bad people, like drug dealers, typically have no problem avoiding the rules. Drug dealers use the current financial system all the time. There have been countless instances where banks have proven to be in cahoots with drug dealers and other bad people. So basically, in Bitcoin, we're saying everyone has the ability to use Bitcoin. Nobody can be cut out of the system. And yes, that means that sometimes bad people will use Bitcoin, but it also means that the good people that are cut out of the traditional financial systems, they'll be able to use Bitcoin too. And that's one of the big things that makes Bitcoin, at the very least, very interesting. And in my opinion, a technology that's very good for humanity as a whole. So let's continue on. I want to see what this guy says next.
The whole Bitcoin market is about $1 billion. It's a novelty for the geek squad. I can assure you, if these became well promulgated, that the U.S. government would shut it down.
So a couple things. First, this guy starts off by saying that the entire Bitcoin network is only worth $1 billion. That's interesting because today it's worth over $1 trillion. That means that the value of Bitcoin has done a 1000x increase in value since the time of that video. The second thing that this guy is saying is that if Bitcoin caught on, then eventually the government would shut it down. I understand why this guy is saying this. It is one of the most common things that people like to say when they're arguing against Bitcoin. The issue is that regardless if any country actually tries to shut it down, they won't be able to. One of the interesting things about Bitcoin is how decentralized the network is. Basically, what this means is that any attempt to shut it down would essentially result in a giant failure. One of the biggest examples is China. China has tried to shut down Bitcoin multiple times, and each time it's tried to shut it down, Bitcoin has only grown. Already, there are tens of millions of people, probably more, that actively use Bitcoin in China, and that's despite the government trying to shut it down. In the United States, on the other hand, it actually looks like Bitcoin is becoming seen as being more and more legitimate, and it looks like the United States government is less and less likely to even attempt to try to shut it down. So I understand why this guy is saying this. He's not wrong that a lot of people have fears about it, but in reality, Bitcoin cannot be shut down by the government, and it looks like the government is looking more and more favorably at Bitcoin in the United States. So let's continue on. I want to see what this guy says next.
It has quintupled in value over the last year. Just since the Cyprus thing came up, it's up over 20%.
Okay, so the anchor just mentioned the Cyprus event. What he's referring to is that around this time, the country of Cyprus needed to pay some bills and was in a lot of debt. So in order to raise money, what they did is they went into all the different bank accounts and they took 48% of all of the uninsured money from all of their citizens. And they basically took it so that they could pay off their debts. Obviously, people in Cyprus were very unhappy when that happened. It would be like if the United States government just came in and took half of the money sitting in your bank account. That is something that a lot of people would be really upset about. It looks like maybe a lot of the people in Cyprus moved to Bitcoin because with Bitcoin, that's impossible. When you have your money in self-custody in Bitcoin, then it is impossible for anyone to take it. It is impossible for the government to take it. It is impossible for any company or third party to take it. It is 100% under your control. That's one of the things a lot of people really like about Bitcoin. And that looks like it might be one of the reasons why Bitcoin experienced that really quick growth right there at around this time. Let's move on. I want to see what he says next.
Over the last month or about a couple months, it's up over 40%. So it's actually getting some visibility out there. Again, you can go online and go to places where Bitcoins are accepted. And there are dozens of places, no websites that you would actually, if I said them, oh yeah, I know that. But it's just going to be very interesting to see just how much this catches on. It just sounds so silly, but maybe it's not.
So I really like the way that this anchor is talking about Bitcoin. He's saying maybe it's silly, but maybe it's not. And the reason why I really like it is because this is how a lot of Bitcoiners sound when they're introduced to Bitcoin at the first time. They say, wow, this internet money, it's kind of crazy, kind of cool, kind of ridiculous, but maybe it's not. And then as people start to learn more and more about Bitcoin, they start to realize how amazing this new money and financial asset is. The more people learn about it, the more they realize that Bitcoin is something that is both very serious and something that usually should be invested in. So I really like the way that this guy is coming across. It's obvious that he doesn't know that much about it, but I like his curiosity. I like his openness to it. This is how a lot of people start off. I hope since this video, he's learned a lot more about Bitcoin and for his sake, hopefully invested because the returns would have been great. But let's see how this conversation continues.
David, how much of your wealth will you place in Bitcoins? What percentage?
So this is kind of funny. This gold guy, he's basically asking the Bitcoin guy, how much are you willing to invest in Bitcoin? And he's saying it kind of as a gotcha question. And I think it's kind of funny because the more anyone really understands Bitcoin, the more they want to invest in it. And the more they realize that all other investments are more or less worthless in comparison. I'm really curious what the Bitcoin guy is going to say. I want to see how he responds. But if you were asking me, the answer is as much as I can. I obviously know a lot about Bitcoin, and it's pretty obvious that Bitcoin is just getting started and is probably going to outcompete and outgrow almost every other investment over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So hopefully this guy replies with something along the lines of a lot. Let's see what this guy says.
I believe that for any sort of a highly diversified portfolio, something like Bitcoin is going to play an increasing role.
But
precisely because it moves in such a different way.
So I think this guy gave a pretty good answer. Essentially what this guy is saying is that Bitcoin is going to play an ever-growing role in everyone's financial portfolio. He's right. Even for people that aren't investing in Bitcoin directly, they're beginning to get indirect exposure as more and more companies start to add Bitcoin onto their balance sheets. So I would say he's right. Bitcoin is going to play an ever-growing role in everyone's portfolio, regardless of whether or not they choose to own Bitcoin directly. So good answer. Let's see what they say next.
If it is widely promulgated and the exponential increase of someone trying to hack it, because there'll be many more people trying to hack it, goes up.
So what this gold guy just said is that as Bitcoin grows, the amount of people that are going to try to hack it will grow with it. And he's not wrong. What I don't think he understands, though, is that as the price of Bitcoin goes up, its security goes up with it. That's one of the really amazing parts about Bitcoin security model or the Bitcoin mining process in general is that it directly scales as Bitcoin grows. So the more Bitcoin grows, the more security Bitcoin gets and the harder it becomes to hack. This happens automatically. It's really fascinating to see how this happens. Again, I talk about it a lot in my book, but overall, he's right on the first half that Bitcoin is going to attempt to be hacked by more and more people over time. But he doesn't understand that it's going to become harder and harder to hack over time as well. And so far, Bitcoin has never been hacked and it is still running flawlessly. And we can validate everything 100% because Bitcoin is transparent. So let's move on and see what they say next.
Your purchasing power can be wiped out in a nanosecond, and that's why it would never be widely accepted in this country.
I hear you say that, but that doesn't make it true.
Great comeback by the Bitcoin guy. So the gold guy basically just said that Bitcoin's purchasing power can go away in a nanosecond. People say that all the time. I do not understand why they say that, because over time it has proven time and time again that Bitcoin is very, very resilient and very, very hard to debase, and it will not go to zero. In fact, Bitcoin just keeps growing. Again, we're on the precipice of new all-time highs right now. We're over $70,000 of Bitcoin, and in 10 and 20 years, it'll probably be way, way higher than that. So I think the Bitcoin guy shut him down perfectly. He said, I hear you say that, but that doesn't make it true. 100% spot on. People say that all the time. And despite people saying that Bitcoin will go to zero all the time, Bitcoin is still reaching all-time highs, and it's about to be 15 years old. So I'm sure if we get the right people in the comments, someone will say Bitcoin is going to zero. It's a scam. It's only a matter of time. I'm sure people will continue to say that, but they're probably going to say it when Bitcoin hits $100,000 of Bitcoin, when it hits $500,000 of Bitcoin, when it hits $1 million of Bitcoin, and people will still think it is going to zero. And in reality, it's not going to zero. Bitcoin is the type of system that is designed to last thousands of years, or potentially even the rest of humanity. So let's move on. The Bitcoin guy just gave the best quote of the interview, I think. I hear you say that, but it doesn't make it true. Let's see what they say next.
And I think that there are people who spend a lot of time on this that might know this topic maybe a bit more and who would believe in it.
A great ending to this segment. The Bitcoin guy basically just said there's a lot of people that understand this really, really well and they believe in it. He's 100% correct. I've been studying Bitcoin very seriously since 2017, and I can tell you that the more time I spend learning about Bitcoin, the more impressed I become with it, and the more confident I feel that it is going to work. So this guy is right. There are a lot of people that spend a lot of time in Bitcoin, and again, I've never actually met someone that has really studied Bitcoin and that really understands it and that thinks Bitcoin is going to zero. From my personal anecdotal experience, the more someone understands Bitcoin, the more confident they are with it. The more they feel like this is something that's going to be around for millennia. Overall, I loved this segment. It was really interesting to see what people were saying about Bitcoin back when it hit $100. What's really interesting, I think, is that a lot of the things that they were saying then, they're still saying now, and they have just been proven over time to be false. So they're saying that purchasing power can go away in a nanosecond. That hasn't happened. They're saying all sorts of bad things. People say that Bitcoin isn't a good form of money for the same reasons, and it's been proven time and time again that Bitcoin is money. Overall, great video. I would give this segment an A. I really liked the discussion that they were having. I think a lot of the questions that they were saying were very good questions. Even the things that the gold guy was saying, those are things that a lot of people say. And he was saying them at a time when people were really new to Bitcoin and didn't really understand it. So it came across as very genuine. I really liked everything about this video. I thought it was fantastic. If there's a video that you want me to react to, go ahead and drop a link in the comments below. I'm more than happy to take a look. And if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe so that you can see more content like this. Overall, great video. Thanks so much, you guys, for watching. I'll see you guys for the next video. See ya.